is the best predictor of future performance. Now, typically what happens in interviewing is that we talk to someone, we look at those skills and those abilities, their education and so on, and then we kind of judge them on a personal level. And if I find someone that I like, maybe they're a good communicator, maybe they're interested in fishing or quilt making or whatever it is that I like to do, then we oftentimes say, well, yeah, I think this person will work out. We often do it on a very subjective basis, and we can never get rid of that subjectivity all the way. But with behavioral-based interviewing, we try to get at what the actual behaviors are that that person has. And so the idea is whatever your past behavior is how you'll probably behave in the future. We all change, I know that, but quite frankly, most of us don't change very much or change very fast. So however I worked in my last job is probably how I'm going to work in my next job as well. It's probably the best thing that we can do. So it looks at past behavior as the best predictor. I already said that. And there was a study that was done that with traditional job interviews, the ability to predict on the job behavior was only 10%. That is abysmal. It's awful. And even with behavioral-based interviewing, it's still only a little bit better than 50-50. But it's, what 550% better than traditional interviewing. So this idea of does this person, someone that I like, which actually is another way to potentially get into discrimination issues. What we want to do is set job and behavioral standards and then look for those to try and drive out some of that subjectivity. Not suggesting that we shouldn't have some, but a little bit of objectivity is going to be to our benefit. So what we do first is we create these interview questions to get at whatever these competencies, style, characteristics, those kinds of things. Clearly, the questions need to be job-related and realistic. Many of us have our favorite questions. That's great. However, I know someone once, his favorite question was, what is your favorite comic strip? Well, that is an interesting question, but I honestly don't see how it's job-related. So let's really think whether the questions we ask are worthwhile. We have a limited amount of time with people anyway. So with behavior-based, what we're looking at is asking questions about their actual past behavior versus asking hypothetical questions. So let me dig into that just a little bit, because this is where it all happens. So we're going to ask questions about what someone actually did in their last job. So that is the actual behavior, as opposed to giving them a scenario and asking them, what would you do? Those two questions can sound really similar, but the outcome is really different. One focuses on their actual behavior. What did you do given a certain circumstance versus what would you do in that circumstance? What this actually does is it separates action from knowledge. I'll give you a quick example. Let's just pretend that you just finished reading 4 books on teamwork. And I ask you about teamwork. Well, you probably could do a great job of answering questions about teamwork. Does it mean that you are good at building teams? Well, I would suggest no. Now, there certainly is a correlation between knowledge and how you act, and hopefully people act in a way that is consistent with what they know, but that's not always the case. What I'm more interested in is what you have done as a leader in terms of creating teams, as opposed to what you know. Now, ideally, I want you to know a lot and act in an appropriate way. But given a choice between what you know and how you do things, I want people who actually perform well, because sometimes people don't always act in a way that's consistent with what the knowledge they have. We all know better, but we all make poor choices from time to time. So here's how this works. With a traditional question or a hypothetical question, it's asking people to speculate. What would you do if? Not a bad question. It's certainly relevant. It isn't behavioral. The behavioral one would be, tell me about a time when you. I'm going to give you some examples. So this would be a hypothetical question. What is your theory of leadership? Great for getting at someone's knowledge, not necessarily great at telling what kind of leader they actually are. So we could turn this around. This would be the behavioral one. Give me an example of how you have led people. Or you could build it to be more complex with a scenario if you like. But it's asking people to reflect back. And by the way, we're going to do a little quiz on this here in a little bit. So this would be a hypothetical question. How would you create strong teams? Again, you read the book on teamwork, so you can do a great job of answering that question. Doesn't mean that you can build strong teams. Instead, the behavioral-based one is, have you ever led a team? That's a yes-no thing. And then specifically, what did you do to have everybody work cooperatively? Or you could have it more specific. You could say, tell me about a time when there was conflict on the team. How did you handle that? Okay, here's some other ones. This is hypothetical. What would you do if you had a tough problem? Certainly job-related, not a bad question, but it's not behavioral. The behavioral way would be, tell me about a situation where you had to solve, and then we're going to give them a specific problem that's relevant to whatever industry you are in. So we're asking them to reflect in the past, what did you actually do when you had this kind of a problem? And then we can make some assumptions that however they handle the problems in the past, is probably the way they're going to handle problems in the future. Certainly better than having them speculate. This would be another behavior one. Give an example of when you had to make a quick decision. So that would give you an idea, one, of what kinds of decisions they had to make. And we can dig into this deeper and ask follow-up questions as well. Here's another behavioral-based question. Tell us about a time when you had to make a decision, but all the options were undesirable. Again, we're always asking people to reflect on the past and tell us about what they did then.